Pregnancy, a time of such joy for some, such admiration for your body and excitement for what parenting will bring, but also for some crippling anxiety, weird aches, pains and cravings, and the prospect that you actually have to give birth to this baby at some point. Pregnancy can be a really strange period of your life and can feel so different for so many people. Season 2 of Bun in the Oven is here to help you navigate this bonkers time, alongside me, Holly Grant, whilst I also navigate this bonkers time during my current second pregnancy. In this season of the podcast, I'm joined by experts in all areas of maternal and perinatal health in real time throughout this pregnancy to cover topics that mean you don't have to spend hours on Google, down a rabbit hole with no real evidence-based answer at the end of it all. I've worked with thousands of women over the last 11 years, and specifically since launching the Bump Plan in 2020. I've heard everything and admitted everything, so don't worry, we cover the embarrassing, gross stuff that you're not sure you want to ask your best friend. See, this is the information you wish you knew before you even knew you needed it. I can't wait for you to join me on this journey as we work out what on earth we're doing together. Enjoy Season 2. Welcome to today's episode of Bun in the Oven, and this is one for those of you who are planning on staying active during pregnancy, as you'll hear today's topic mentioned no doubt when training, and the advice and guidance can seem quite confusing at times. It's also something thought to affect almost 100% of us by the time we give birth, so it's pretty common. Today's topic is diastasis, or diastasis, or DRA. It has lots of names. Diastasis is one of the prenatal concerns I'm most asked about, and I understand why women are confused. The information available around diastasis, particularly when exercising, is changing quite quickly, which is a good thing, and the language we use when talking about it is so important. Currently, I'm 16 weeks pregnant, and I already had a slight diastasis after my first pregnancy. I know how to manage it, and as you'll learn in this episode, I'm not worried about it during pregnancy, so it's important we break down some of the myths and fear around it. So I'm so grateful I get to speak to the super knowledgeable Anthony Lowe in this episode and break down what diastasis is, why it happens, how to train with a diastasis, and why we all need to stop worrying so much about it. Anthony is a well-respected physiotherapist from Australia and runs the Physio Detective Service and My PT Education. He has been involved in antenatal and postnatal education and management for his whole career and has been integral in how I view diastasis and the language we use around it. This is an important episode for anyone who is nervous or confused about diastasis, has had a previous diagnosis, or works with pregnant or postnatal people. I hope you find this episode helpful and it helps free you from fear of movement. And now, ahead of this episode, a few words from our sponsor. Given the theme of this podcast, I imagine that some of you are currently pregnant or planning a family. So many women I know just aren't sure how to move their body safely during this changing time, or they want to stay active but need someone to show them the way and hold their hand. That's where the Bump Plan Pregnancy comes in. The Bump Plan Pregnancy is a holistic prenatal fitness plan that allows you to work out with confidence at each trimester of your pregnancy. Founded by myself, Holly Grant, the Bump Plan Pregnancy has already helped over 25,000 pregnant women stay active safely and feel empowered throughout their pregnancies. Through its trimester-specific workouts, in which I'm always at the same stage of my pregnancy as you will be in yours, extensive education hub, discount hub and growing Facebook community, you'll feel supported and part of a welcome community. Let me help you move safely through your pregnancy, maintain your fitness and strength, and enter parenthood strong and prepared for all the demands it poses. As a listener of Bun in the Oven, I'm offering you 20% per month off the cost of your monthly subscription to the Bump Plan, simply by entering the code BUN20 at checkout. To get started today, simply head to pilatespt.co.uk/the-bump-plan and enter the code BUN20 at checkout. That's BUN20 in lowercase to get 20% off the monthly cost of the Bump Plan Pregnancy. Join our community today and enter labour and motherhood strong, capable and prepared with the Bump Plan. Hi Anthony, thank you so much for being on today's podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're so welcome. So, Anthony, me and you know that the topic of diastasis is incredibly confusing for the general population, but also for fitness professionals as well, because the research that's coming out is incredible and really moving things along, but it's changing so quickly. So, we're having to really stay on top of what the new research is and also challenge the way that we thought about diastasis for so many years. So, it's really, really exciting to have you here, especially as you're one of the people really pioneering a change in the way that we talk about and think about diastasis. So I've been so excited. I feel like I'm interviewing kind of my celebrity idol. So I guess we need to start really scraping it back for people who have maybe heard a friend mention diastasis, or they've heard their midwife mention they've got diastasis, but actually they just do not know what it means. So let's start right at the beginning. What is diastasis?
Cool, thanks very much. Look, diastasis or diastasis, or however people want to say it, just means a separation between the two muscles at the front, the six-pack muscles, the rectus. And so it just means there's a widening. When people hear the word separation, sometimes they think that there's literally nothing between them, but they're joined together by tissue. And so by definition, a diastasis, that's how I say it, a diastasis is like the muscles have moved apart just because it's accommodated a baby, or visceral fat, like in my case, or just because of different things like medical reasons. You can develop them. You don't have to have been pregnant. And the tissue in between them has thinned out a little bit to allow that movement to occur. So that's what a diastasis is, or a diastasis. If there was nothing joining the two bits together, the two muscles together, we call that a hernia. So that would be the difference there.
And I think that's a really important distinction as well, because I think one of the reasons there's so much fear around diastasis is because of that word separation. So there is this sense that, oh my gosh, they've pulled apart and that must have caused damage. Whereas actually it's a really adaptive way of growing a bump, isn't it? And so I like to sort of explain to clients that those two six-pack muscles are almost like strips of bacon down the front of your tummy, and when they contract, they cause movement. And they, as you said, they're not connected directly to each other. So when they separate, they don't just pull apart from each other. I like to imagine it almost like they're connected to like balloon material. And so as our bumps grow and they need to move apart to make space for the baby, it's almost just like a balloon stretching. A balloon doesn't just split, it just stretches and it thins, and that material thins out and it adapts to that change in the stretch between those two muscles.
That's right. That's right. And it's normal. It's adaptive. It's what you would want to happen. Otherwise, you don't have enough room for your baby. And if you don't stretch there, then there's not much else that you can stretch at because you're not moving bone. Therefore, you'll start, literally creating muscle tears, which are much more painful and not very pleasant. So, it's a great adaptive way for your body to accommodate your body to accommodate a growing baby.
And one of the questions we get asked a lot is, how can I prevent diastasis during pregnancy? But actually, that's like, trying to stop the trees from blowing in the wind. Like it's meant to happen. And I'm right that research shows that up to 100% of women, by the time they give birth, will have diastasis.
Yeah, it's somewhere between 2/3 and 100%. It depends on how you measure it and what you define it as. There's a whole bunch of issues with consistency that hopefully we'll get to deal with in the future. But the bottom line is that it's not really considered that big a deal to certain medical professionals, which can leave women feeling like they're being dismissed because it can be a big deal to the person. So I think that's an important distinction. Quite often there's a cavalier, almost, what are you worrying about? This is normal. Get on with life. It's not really acknowledging the person's concerns, their anxieties, their fears, managing a whole bunch of things that are going on in their life, because, we're talking about pregnancy-related diastasis here. I think that it's important to acknowledge that is a thing too.
Yeah, and we'll talk in a moment about postnatally, because I think that's when really we do need to be making a distinction between, what's considered potentially normal recovery and when that diastasis might be presenting a slight issue. So essentially what we're saying is anyone who's listening to this who is pregnant right now, if you have had somebody say to you, you have diastasis, so don't do X, just understand that actually you've got diastasis because that is a perfectly normal adaptive part of pregnancy. So then, if somebody knows that they have diastasis during pregnancy, how might that, or how might we need to consider how they train, or how that diastasis might affect the way that they exercise their bodies?
Yeah, it really depends on their capability. I literally just got off a call with a CrossFitter who is 6 weeks postpartum, and has been told, you can't do this, you can't do that, and she made the very, very common remark: it feels like a cookie cutter sheet, but she's not the average person. She's quite adept, and she's doing really, really well postpartum as well. And so meeting people where they're at is really important. But in terms of pregnancy, first of all, the prevention, as we said, there is no strong research to say that you can prevent it. There is one paper which has a suggestion that exercise may be helpful, but then there's another paper with a suggestion that maybe exercise isn't that helpful. And honestly, what I take from that is it seems to be individual. So for me, the consideration would be things like paying attention to how you feel, following the exercise guidelines. So, being from the UK, it would be the Chief Medical Officer's advice. They've got great infographics online. So, still keeping up that moderate intensity exercise, still keeping the hours up. There's actually not a whole lot that's different. And if you have the contraindications to exercise, I'll almost guarantee that you'll have a doctor in your face telling you about these things, because they're serious medical conditions. Otherwise, for the average person whose medical professionals are like, yeah, you're going really well, keep it up, then exercising to up to a 7 out of 10 intensity seems to be okay. But if we're considering diastasis, what was your previous strength like? How did you go during your first trimester, where you might have had morning sickness? Most people finish their morning sickness in that first 15 weeks, but maybe you have hyperemesis, or maybe you have other things going on. Maybe, you got a terrible cough or a cold during that time, and you're generating tons and tons of uncontrolled pressure. Maybe you've got other conditions going on. So it is difficult to say that there is a general thing to do, but one of the principles that I do like, and hopefully I've contributed to the world of diastasis in some way, is at least distinguishing between hard and soft doming. So being able to determine if you're putting too much tension through the area, as opposed to, and honestly, it seems like it's around the world, but in particular in the UK, there's a lot of fear about doing anything when you're pregnant or postpartum in the pelvic health world. So I think working by principles, as opposed to let's just default to you've got to do nothing but breathing and isolated contractions, like that goes against all the evidence. By the way, it goes against all the evidence. One of my sayings is restricting activity in the hopes of saving a vagina is not holistic women's health. Like, it just isn't. So women are so much more than their pelvic floors and their diastasis.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, I don't know what it's like, to be honest, over in Australia, but I understand it in the UK. And one of the reasons why we set up the bump plan years ago was because there was this really, really cautionary myth as well out there that, as soon as you got pregnant, you needed to stop moving. Lots of women were nervous that they might harm themselves or their baby, and it creates this kind of real fear of movement. But then also, you're expecting somebody to go through the most challenging endurance event they're ever going to go through, pregnancy, then potentially another really, really challenging endurance event, labor, and then parenting. Oh my God, is the hardest thing I've ever
I
done.
was going to say parenting is harder.
That's like the hardest bit. Although labor was tough, but yeah, parenting is one long endurance event as well. So I think it's really crazy to then ask women to basically like down train it before they then go into the hardest part of their lives. So a lot of it is about myth busting and okaying women that actually, you would have to be doing something really, really crazy if you're a healthy woman with an uncomplicated pregnancy to cause yourself or your baby any harm. And actually, not exercising is probably one of the worst things that you could do if you're able to. So, Anthony, I wonder if you could explain slightly kind of pressure, intra-abdominal pressure, and pressure management, because I think that if we're going to talk about doming in a moment, which I'd love to, I think lots of our members will first need to understand pressure management and what pressure in the core is.
Sure. So pressure is essential for normal function of the body. So generating intra-abdominal pressure is very, very helpful. It helps with the stability of things. If you hear the myth that, your diaphragm is connected to your core, which is connected to your pelvic floor and all the rest of it, the mediating force of that is actually intra-abdominal pressure, not anatomy trains fascia. Like, there's too much give in the tissues for it to be like a string. Like, the mediating force, the way that force is transmitted is actually through pressure. And this is, we're talking basically 30 years ago, people were talking about this. So it's not like it's a new idea. In fact, core stability is this new idea that hasn't panned out. So pressure is generated in your chest and in your tummy. And the way that we generate pressure is through contraction of the muscles in addition to the weight of our tissues. So our internal organs, the lungs, the heart, all your intestines and organs, they all contribute to pressure as well. And then you've got fluid pressure, and fluid doesn't just mean liquid; it also means gas. And so when you are pregnant, for example, and I don't know, you're reclining on the couch, on the sofa, and you pop your head up because somebody came in through the door, and you see a little sausage roll appear on your belly, and you have a look down. Yeah, that's just pressure because you used your abdominal muscles to sit up to have a look who came in through the door. So you increase the pressure, and then that pressure, just through physics, we know that the pressure goes in all directions equally when it's in a gas. That's what happens. So we generate pressure that way. Our diaphragm generates negative pressure in our chest relative to the outside air, and that's what causes the rush of air into our lungs. But when it does that, it squishes down into the abdomen, and that's what increases the pressure in our abdomen. And one of the suggestions that I made, I was looking at the dates not that long ago, and it's like, what was it, 2000 and it was a long time ago, maybe 8 years ago. But I was saying, what if diastasis is a way of your body to take the pressure off your pelvic floor? What if it's actually a way that your body is preserving pressure? So yeah, that's very difficult for people to hear because that's not what we're taught. But then there was some research in 2016 that seemed to indicate it as well. So that was fun. You know, it's a funny thing, pressure, but you need it, you want it, and like everything else, too much pressure can cause issues. Too little pressure will mean that your body goes, why am I keeping all this strong material around doing nothing? I'm going to take it away. So you have to stress it to maintain it. You have to stress it to progress it. And if you don't stress it, if you just lie in bed, well, the body's just going to go, I'm going to use these resources if you're not going to use it.
Mm-hmm. So I wonder whether you kind of agree with this analogy, but sometimes I'll try and make it as really basic as possible, with clients who've maybe never even heard of intra-abdominal pressure. And I'll sort of explain it almost like the abdominal cavity being like a balloon. And so inside that balloon, there is a certain amount of pressure, and that in general is pressing out against the entire balloon in all directions. And so when you gave your analogy of kind of sitting on the sofa, lifting your head, or let's say someone's getting out the bath or they're getting out of bed, it's almost the muscles are contracting, and that's almost like squeezing a balloon. And when you squeeze a balloon, the pressure is dispersed differently. So you might notice when you squeeze a balloon, it slightly changes shape. And so what we might notice when we sit up or when we lift our head is that we've created more pressure. And so we notice that pressure then moves forwards. And because of that slightly stretched linea alba, we might notice that that pressure goes through that part of our core more, which we would then call doming or coning. So would that be a very simplistic way of kind of explaining how pressure works in the core and how that pressure has to go somewhere so it will go to another area?
Yes, it is a simplistic way to describe what occurs. We can change the relative stiffness of tissues through our muscles. And so, that's why an aluminium can, in and of itself, is actually not very strong, but it can withstand the pressures because of the way that it's been designed. And so, yeah, that is how pressure works. But it's not just one. I suppose the key is that it's not just one volume of pressure. It's not one unit of pressure or one unit of volume. By actively contracting our muscles, we change the dimensions of the volume as well as, and that will increase the pressure because we decrease the volume, we increase the pressure. And that's important. And then changing the amount of material in there, the amount of gas, the amount of fluid, liquid, will also change the pressure as well. And it's a dynamic system. It's a living body. It's
a growing uterus is going to change it as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And like even moment to moment, I've had the privilege of working with intra-abdominal pressure sensors. Even with them, you will not find a level pressure reading. Like it changes every second. I don't think I've seen I don't remember, but it was like 10,000 lines of recording, like in a pressure trace. I don't think I saw one repeated measurement. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just too variable. Yeah.
How amazing are our bodies that they can adapt so much, though, to that constantly changing environment.
Yeah, especially seeing as though people didn't pay attention to it that much before.
Yeah.
We were doing it automatically all these millennia. So
Yeah, we've got by fine. So then if we're saying, if we're talking about that pressure, then we've mentioned on that fact of pressure pushing through that stretched, thinner linea alba. And so some of us will notice it. Sausage roll, I love that analogy. Or sometimes we talk about like a Toblerone. It might look quite pointy, but it's definitely a noticed kind of coning shape of the tummy. Now, traditionally, for a long time, I think the language around that was, if you notice that is happening, stop what you're doing. But we now know that actually that's inducing fear, which is stopping people moving, and we need a strong core during pregnancy, and is also not necessarily accurate. So talk to us about that. Should we dome or shouldn't we dome?
Well, what is the definition of doming? That's the first question that I have for people, because you take somebody who's relatively lean and their early pregnancy, but far along enough that the hormones have made some changes to their tissues. And when they lie down on their back, their rib cage might sit higher than their pelvis and their abdomen. And so any movement of the head and shoulders, for example, is going to increase the pressure. Your muscles turn on and suddenly your abdomen will jump up and people will go, oh my God, I shouldn't have done that. It's like, your muscles were off and now they're turned on. And so I teach people that what muscles will pull on one line if there's nothing to bend them. So obviously a growing uterus will bend the muscles around curves, but before then or after then, if you don't have visceral fat in the way, then when your muscles contract, they should form either a cylinder. Some people are blessed with a flat looking tummy at the front. That is a genetic thing as much as anything else. Many people have cylinders, and then most people are somewhere in between. And so, some people will just always look like they have this pointy bit out the front, and they're quite distressed by it because they're told that this is not normal. And like, I've asked people, it sounds weird and a bit creepy, but it's like, can you find me a picture of when you're like 10 and you're a kid, just in your swimmers or something? And then they do, and they go, oh my God, I looked the same when I was 10. It's like, yeah, like you've always looked this way. It's okay. Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. But because we're now made aware of this thing, any sort of blip, people call it the blip, right? Any sort of movement of the tummy, people freak out a little. So that the first thing is it really doming? I don't know. Secondly, movement of your abdominal wall does not mean a problem. It just means that things are moving. If you're concerned about making it worse, well, most people wouldn't like somebody stretching them so much that it hurts. So that's a good place to start. If you take your finger and you pull it backwards and then you feel the tendon where you're pulling on it, it usually gets quite tight and sore. It's like, okay, if it feels that hard and I'm not even going to snap my own finger off, well then, but I feels uncomfortable, well, if it gets that hard in the midline, maybe that tissue is pulling too hard. Now, most people are not there. Most people don't get there because most people, as soon as they see any movement, they stop. Now, that is one way of creating public awareness that is unlikely to generate too much tension. However, it's also a great way to get people not fulfilling what they need in keeping strong. So, it's a double-edged sword, and people tend to see the benefits of their advice instead of considering the possible negative effects, such as deconditioning. And so, with the doming, if you're not stretching it that hard, if your sausage roll, you can push down through the middle and you can go in between your muscles and you can feel that, then it's unlikely to be too hard. Unlikely. Yeah. And that's the hard doming, soft doming.
That's really interesting. I think that what's so important, and I don't know if you've experienced this in your line of work, but in studio, I'll often find with clients that there's a real cutoff between like head and body, in so much that in studio we might sometimes have clients wearing a heart rate monitor during cardio exercises. But what I prefer to do is at the end of a cardio round, say to them, so how hard were you working on a scale of 1 to 10? And they'll be like, I don't know. And they'll be desperate to look at their watch. And I'll say, no, but just put a number on it. Any number. Like 1's really easy, 10's really hard. And they're really flustered and they find it really difficult at first to put a number on it because they're so disassociated. And so one thing that we try really hard in studio is to get people to move away from looking at their watches and instead really thinking, how does it feel compared to normal? And so I think that's why it's really important with things like diastasis is that, do you remember what your abs looked like when you did a crunch before you got pregnant? Like, were you ever aware of what they looked like before? Or did clients realize that their abdominals, those two rectus abdominals, have never connected to each other? There's always been a slight gap, even before they were pregnant, because of the linea alba. So I think anyone listening to this who isn't yet pregnant, it's really helpful to start learning and understanding, how your body moves before you are even pregnant. Because otherwise it might actually, like you said, look the same or look very similar to how it used to look. But because we're pregnant now, we're suddenly more aware and we're more cautious and nervous. So I think that level of understanding. And also another thing that's resonated with what you said, Anthony, is it's kind of like, it's not black or white. It's not you're doming, so you need to stop. It's kind of like, okay, you might be doming slightly, but is it much? And does it hurt? How does it feel? Is it hard? Is it soft? So I think that awareness of how your body deals with pressure and can really reduce fear, and understanding that it's not all or nothing. It's not that when you see doming, you need to stop.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing, it just came to mind to me, is what is with this belly breathing business? It's been going on for 2 decades, over 2 decades for me. It doesn't make sense to me that people lock down their ribs and do this whole belly breathing thing, because if you hold your ribs down and you don't let your chest move, you're gonna produce abdominal movement in ways that you may think is not good for you. I'd love to see people have their ribs move a little bit more. I love seeing chest movement during breathing. If you ever have anybody do any exercise of any decent intensity, if your chest is not moving when you're breathing, you're probably not going hard enough, or you're holding it down too much. So there's one way that you can reduce tension on your diastasis, let your chest move. There's that. It's interesting with the intensity thing. I think it depends on how sweary people are. But once you start using swear words to describe how you're feeling, you're probably in the high intensity area. I personally don't mind if experienced people who've done high intensity work at high intensity during pregnancy. In fact, one thing that people may not realize is that often, not always, people feel more comfortable with exercise during pregnancy at high intensity than they do afterwards. Like, people are 39, 40 weeks pregnant doing CrossFit at relatively high intensity and are struggling 10 weeks postpartum to get up to a 6 out of 10 effort, a 60% effort, and they feel just wiped out because, I don't know, being a parent of a newborn will do that to you.
Yeah.
And underestimating just how much the postpartum journey takes, So, pregnancy is usually not where the battle is won or lost. It's in the long game. It's in the postpartum period, I think. Unless you're doing something super, super extreme, it's unlikely you're doing anything. Unless you're threading your legs around a balcony and hanging yourself off horizontally just for shits and giggles. Unless you're doing that, you're probably not putting enough tension to really make your diastasis worse.
Yeah, I agree. So, in summary, for those of you who are pregnant right now, diastasis is not something that needs to be feared, and we think it's a really adaptive part of pregnancy. When it comes to doming, it's not black and white. What one person might be able to do and cope with well will be very different to what somebody else might cope with well. And so it's really about just being present, being mindful, and being aware of how it feels, and not just fearing movement, because a strong core is so, so important. So then let's move on to postnatally, because we both know that that's kind of where the real challenge comes in. So talk to us about what happens with the diastasis after we've had our babies.
Well, just like anything that has been stretched, when you take the thing that's stretching it away, tissue that's adapted often doesn't adapt as quickly as the thing that, I don't know, exited your body 12 hours earlier. So you're left with a lot of tissue that is used to looking like you walked into a sports store and are trying to smuggle a basketball out underneath your skin. That skin needs time to shrink, to adapt back to a shorter position. In some cases, the skin does not adapt back, and sometimes that skin has been stretched quickly, which is why you may be left with stretch marks. However, skin is not diastasis. So skin, technically, from a strictly medical point of view, has nothing to do with diastasis. It's skin. Diastasis has to do with the distance between the two muscles and the tissue that's in between it. And the tissue that's in between it is not skin. A lot of people are concerned that they feel quite vulnerable at the front because they have a diastasis, and I understand that. But to my knowledge, we have not heard or seen, or there hasn't been a case reported where, and this is going to be graphic, I apologize, but this is what women tell me they're scared of. They're scared of their tummies ripping open like in Alien, and all their insides will be on the outside. Like when I ask people, what do you think will happen if you overdo it? And that's what they tell me. And yet we've not had that occur, to my knowledge, anywhere in the world. Like your skin is quite tough. If you want to know, like you mentioned bacon before, when you get a strip of bacon, you got the long, thin bit. They're your obliques, transversus, internal oblique, external oblique, and then the skin, the rind. And then the round bit, that's like a medallion, that's the rectus of the pig. And, well, we've got the same muscles. So if you want to take a whole piece of bacon and then try tear it by hand with the skin on, or a piece of pork belly, just try tear it by hand. It's pretty hard to do. It's not going to happen. That's why people use knives. It's unlikely that you'll be able to tear your skin apart like that. So that's the first reassurance I want to give people. It's a weird one, I know, but I've had way too many people tell me that this is their fear. So I'd rather just address it. That's number one. Number two is that everything we know in life is about understanding that your body adapts to what you get it to do. So if you sit a lot and you hunch a lot, then your body will adopt the hunching position, not because that's bad for you. It's just that you keep doing it. So your body goes, let's make this easier. I'm just going to hunch you over because this is what you always want to do. We also know from the research that it only takes about 10 minutes in total, added up around the whole of your day, 10 minutes in total of not that movement to maintain what you already have. So reaching for your coffee, putting the clothes out on the line, reaching for something on a high shelf, anything that gets you up and extending will be fine. You won't be stuck hunched over. You keep sitting in a hunched over position, well, then your body will adapt to it. Now, if we acknowledge that adaptation occurs that way, well, then we want most people, nobody that I've known has ever said, listen, Anthony, I want my belly to just remain looking like it's pregnant, even when I'm 50 years old. Most people don't want that. So if you want it to be firmer and flatter, which is what most people want, because we should acknowledge that aesthetics are important to people, then you have to train it. If it's the skin that you don't like, it's difficult. I'm not sure that there's much you can do. You certainly can't spot reduce without surgery or liposuction. Diets won't do that for you. There may be some indication that perhaps having stronger hypertrophied muscles might be better able to stretch that tissue in ways that you find aesthetically pleasing. So yeah, train your way through it. But most people are undertraining their abdomen. Most people think that sit-ups are just not that good an exercise. I think when you do sit-ups only, it's not that good an exercise. But if you only did planks, I would say that that's not that good an exercise if that's all that you ever did. Do you know what I mean? Like anything that's all you ever do. If you only run, that's probably not that good, because the World Health Organization and every health department around the world says that you need to include at least 2 sessions of whole body training, strengthening. So running takes care of your cardio component, but not your strengthening component. So yeah, there's a whole bunch in there. In the postpartum sense of things, I think the first consideration should always be that you are a new parent, or at least a parent of a newborn, and that should be, if that's what you want it to be, that should be the primary consideration from which we see everything else. Because um, if you wish to care for a child, I suggest that you prioritize your recovery, because we know that fatigue, lack of sleep, will interfere with your milk supply. It will interfere with your ability to recover, just in general. And we also know the effect of fatigue has on your ability to make decisions. And if you want to be a parent that's like they're over the legal limit of alcohol, get less than 5 hours of sleep in total. Like, that'll do it for you. So I think that's number one. Quite often, in our gung-ho, let's fix this problem, we heap more physical stress on people who are already fatigued and struggling because of whatever reason, but a newborn is a good one. Um, it can often make health problems worse, and then people get upset that they're not getting the results they're looking for, and their nutrition is not on point. I did a podcast with Lily Nichols, who has got some great pregnancy and postpartum dietary advice, which I think is well researched and worth listening to. And rest, so important. You get those things going, it's going to let you exercise more. There's lots of things that you can do with your baby so that you're not, because there's a lot of mum guilt out there. So there's lots of things that you can do with your baby so that you can do both playtime and exercise. And instead of life being a whole series of you shouldn't do this or that, it becomes more fun. What can I do with my baby and promote recovery? I think it's just a much more positive way to look at things, instead of, you've got these people who are sleep deprived and they're struggling to remember all the things that they have to do because they want to do the very best thing for themselves and for their baby. And it just seems like a lot of mental load. So I think that's the key there. And once you're at that exercise spot, well, then just use the hard doming, soft doming as a good starter. Notice what your preferences are and go from there. We do not have to make this stuff too complicated. It's just crazy. It's like, honestly, I think it's a way that we justify our existence. I know that there are people that teach on education courses that say you need to make sure that your client knows that they need you. They need you to make sure that they're doing the exercise right. Like, really? Come on. They don't need you that badly. I need a trainer to make sure I do the stuff. I need a group class so that I enjoy myself. It's not that I lack the knowledge of what to do. I have other reasons why I need a trainer, right? And so, yeah, it's certainly not to induce fear and all the rest of it. But I think we sing from the same hymn sheet. I'm starting to ramble. I think my meds have worn off.
No, don't worry. Well, no, I completely agree. I think that's why it's so important to educate new parents on diastasis, so that they are aware that actually there's lots of what you were doing before that you could just do, whilst you're playing with your child. And as long as you understand, at least at a low level, that understanding of hard doming, soft doming, or understanding how it feels when you apply that pressure, we're then hopefully going to stop people going from doing nothing for 6 to 12 weeks and then going back to doing everything they did before. I think it's that understanding of just working with your body as it recovers. One thing I don't think we have mentioned is, so we've said that in theory, most women, by the time they give birth, are going to have diastasis. But postnatally, where do we stand? Does everyone have it? Does it go away for everybody? Talk us through those stats.
It's like what I said before. It depends on how you measure it. Depends on when you measure it. There's some stuff out there that says that whatever you have at 8 weeks is what you're going to have at 12 weeks. But I've seen people 10 years down the line change. So I don't know. That was an observational study, to be fair. So you don't know what those people are doing in their life. And I suspect how you do something matters more than what you do. So I don't think there's anything special. I think you need to do exercises facing down, on your side, on your back, hanging, standing, and leaning backwards. So like hanging off a rail or a GHD or a Roman chair, leaning backwards. Because I think these are all things that we should be doing. We should be loading the trunk in 3 dimensions. And weight bearing impact exercise, so more than walking, as well as loaded exercise, and that's for the pelvic floor and diastasis. To me, I don't even bother making a distinction. To me, it's just what healthy exercise looks like. So whether you have diastasis or not, it's going to be some form of those movements, and then the primals: push, pull, squat, split, like split step, those sorts of things, hip hinge.
And I know that you kind of promote a similar message as I do. It's about like doing something different. Like you've listed all those different positions that we should be getting people in, and all those different actions that we should be getting their trunk to be in. And just in general, like you said with the running, if you do the same thing all the time, you'll get really good at that, but not at other things. We need to make sure that we're putting load through that core in all different positions: rotation, flexion, controlled extension, things like that. So it's actually not rocket science, but I think that's sometimes where people need a bit of support in thinking up those exercises. But essentially, do the exercises and just understand how that affects your diastasis. But for lots of women, they will notice that it gradually improves over time, but there will be some women who find that it does bother them. It gives a pendular appearance to their tummies, and it might affect their confidence. As you said, aesthetics, whilst we want to preach as much as possible, it's about function. Aesthetics is always going to be an issue for some of us as well.
I'd say for most people. Aesthetics is the primary concern. There are lots of people who say that function is more important to them, and when you've got absolutely unrestricted function, they will tell you that aesthetics is now the problem. So, it's important to acknowledge, and it's okay that aesthetics is your concern. It is okay for that to be the case. I think the preying on people's insecurities about their aesthetics is, immoral, unethical. Mm-hmm. I don't like it. I'm not a fan. But it sells, right? It sells. Fear sells. The statistics will show you that things that make us smile, we don't linger very long on. Things that shock us or make us angry, we tend to interact with more, which means that the algorithm will keep feeding you stuff that you interact with, the negative stuff. So I think that that's important to understand. And 3D motion is so important. So important. Meeting people where they're at is so important. Um, Understanding that you could have a very wide diastasis and be completely functional is okay. Understanding that aesthetically it may not please you, that's a different discussion. But certainly the fear that we've generated around it is not cool. Not a fan. In fact, when I first started teaching the female athlete course, I set aside 15 minutes on diastasis because I thought this is an easy topic. I just hit it for 15 minutes and move on. An hour and a half later, I had to move us on. But people were just not on board with what I was talking about. They were very, very shocked. And it's like, why are we complicating this? Like, it's not that complicated. So yeah, I get it though. I get it. It's once you believe certain things, then having a diastasis might mean kind of scary things to people, but it doesn't. It doesn't have to be, because those things like core stability and needing tension across your diastasis, those things aren't necessary to have core stability. It's just how it is. And if you want that tension across the linea alba, the tissue between the rectus muscles, then dome a little. You'll get tension across it. It'll be fine. It's what it does. When it looks for tension, it'll generate the tension. So
I think, as you've mentioned, because of the aesthetic effects of diastasis, we probably, I think women probably put much more emphasis on it and concern on it. Whereas actually, you know, for lots of women, they might have a slight diastasis, but their pelvic floor might be in a much worse position, but they're putting more onus on the diastasis because of that. You know, they're seeing it every day. Whereas actually with their pelvic floor, they might be slightly unaware, except for when they sneeze or cough or have penetrative sex.
well, historically, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Historically, diastasis, like abdominoplasty, was funded for low back pain. So, like, I don't know, I guess it would be in somebody's interest to have a core stability reason for why they might have an abdominoplasty. Now, in Australia, they've taken that away nearly 10 years ago. And so I think I think plastic surgeons are trying to get it back. Do I think it causes low back problems? I think the reaction to the diagnosis of diastasis, I think the reaction to having a tummy that isn't flat like it used to be before you got pregnant, I think the negative messaging about how harmful having a diastasis is, and therefore you walking around braced all the time. Like, you can even hear that my voice sounds different because I'm bracing. I think they're the things that causes the problem. And then people say, well, I've got a diastasis. Of course I have all this pain. I have these problems. And it's like, yeah, you've got a diagnosis of diastasis, and the way you're reacting to it because of what other people have told you, maybe that's the reason why. And I peel these things back for people. I help them see this, and all of their pelvic floor dysfunction, low back pain, all of the things, except to maybe the aesthetics, in certain cases, I like to see the really difficult ones. They can do whatever they want. They don't have pain anymore. They don't have any difficulty or discomfort. They don't feel as vulnerable. They feel like they don't like how they look, but they can now recognize the difference between that and the physical. I can't sit up. It's like, oh, you can't sit up because you don't practice sitting up. You always log roll. Stop log rolling. Start sitting up. Oh, I guess that makes sense. And then 3 weeks later, they're doing sit-ups like a champion. Do you know what I mean? And no bearing down. They're not leaking anymore. Their prolapse symptoms are going, and quite often, if I touch someone's perineum and I can feel their pelvic organ prolapse symptoms, and I'm touching their perineum, then how is that possible that I can touch their prolapse when I do an external examination, not in the midline, it's probably because it might be something else other than their pelvic organ that I'm touching, like a pelvic floor muscle that they're trying to keep on. And you listen to them and they'll tell you, yeah, I always try to keep my core on all day. It's like, yeah, I wonder why you feel exhausted at the end of the day. That's just a lot of tension to carry. And us physios, we're trying to be as helpful as possible without thinking about what that means, because we know that we wouldn't keep those muscles on all day. It just makes sense to us not to do that. But we sometimes forget. It's called the curse of knowledge. We don't know what it's like not to know. And yeah. And so then people are left with those sorts of things. You know, a
That's
classic
really
example
true.
is I had a patient who was told that they shouldn't bend over because they had a disc that was found on a CT scan to be a bulge. 21-year-old person. I saw them at 24. They hadn't bent over for 2 and a bit years. Like, because they were told not to bend over because of the disc. Now, I could always say that the physio was irresponsible and blah, 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 blah. But the thing is that bending over when you've got an acute disc injury is painful. So we would say things like, you know, just be careful with bending over. Don't bend over. And in our heads, it's like for the next couple of weeks. This
Not for
person
forever.
literally didn't bend over anymore, would lie down on the bed to get changed because they didn't want to bend over to put their undies on. So, you know, we really have to think about how our words land.
Yeah. Because as you've mentioned, you know, if people are fearful of movement, they don't move. Not moving or aggressively bracing or being too protective can then actually have other symptoms, potentially sensitivity and pain elsewhere, or adaptive patterns that are not beneficial. So actually scaling it back, allowing people to get rid of that fear can make a huge difference. So language, I think, is the main thing that's come
Yeah.
up here for me.
Well, and language to me would indicate what your beliefs, your attitudes, your meaning, and your stories are. I call them our bands. And so our words and our actions, they betray our BAMs. If you really want to think, if you really want to know what somebody thinks about something, you just listen to what they say and you watch what they do. And often there's an inconsistency there. People often say the right things and don't do the right things, or people often do the right things but just don't say it the right way. But yeah, in general, if you've been fed a fear-based message, I will see it in how you move and I'll hear it in how you tell me about it. And every day. I hear it every day, which is quite sad, but we keep working towards something better. And that's why, you know, I do things like this, because the message needs to be out there. Words do
Yeah.
matter. Words and actions do matter.
And there's so much change, as we mentioned at the beginning. There's so much new research coming out, and people that are trying to change the way that we think about diastasis. So basically, stay tuned, because you know, everything that we thought we knew about it can change overnight. So essentially, don't panic, and there are options out there for you. You don't need to be scared of moving your body.
I would certainly encourage anybody who sees a physio or a PT, a trainer, who hears the you shouldn't or don't do this, to always feel free to ask the question, can you provide some reasons for that? Can I go check this with somebody? And if they're worth their salt, they should be totally okay with that. I always stand ready to provide evidence, and I'm always happy for people to get a second opinion and have that person challenge me too. I always. And you know, if people get offended by that, that's not a you problem. That's a them problem, right? That's their insecurities. So yeah, I think any professional that's worth staying with would be confident to be able to defend what they're doing and why.
Yeah. And if you are a fitness professional watching this as well, just being aware that the guidelines do change constantly and the advice and the language that we use is often changing. So definitely follow people like Anthony and, of course, Gráinne Donnelly, who we've talked about before. Lots and lots of professionals out there. And in fact, Anthony, it's a great time for me to ask you, where should people be getting more information about this from? Who do you trust?
Look, anthonylowe.com is where everything is at. There's courses for the public and for the professionals there. There is the Diastasis project, which is it's done through volunteer work and supported by donations. So the goal is to get this information out there to people without any financial barriers. So if all they can manage is $1, then $1 is what they donate. Obviously, for those who appreciate and can donate more, we would gladly appreciate and accept that. But we don't want it to be for those who can afford good quality information. So the Diastasis project, or diastasis.info is the website. So two websites, diastasis.info and anthonylowe.com. You can find my stuff there.
Great. Well, Anthony, thank you so much. And I hope that for those of you listening, it's helped clear some things up. I know sometimes it can feel like it might make it more confusing, but I hope that essentially you've realised or you've come away from this feeling less nervous, less cautionary, less confused about diastasis after everything Anthony's taught us.
Yeah, I'm always happy if people want to message me at PhysioDetective on Instagram. Always happy to do that. And I do online appointments. You can find that all on the website, but at PhysioDetective on Instagram is probably the easiest way to find me. And tag me on things because, if I don't see stuff, I can't respond to stuff. I don't go looking for it. But if somebody points me at it, I'll do that. But shoot me messages, say hello, tell me what you think. Always happy to have a chat.
Great. Anthony, thank you so much. And to everyone listening, I hope you've enjoyed this episode and I'll see you again soon. Thanks, Anthony. Bye.
Thanks, Ollie. Bye.
Firstly, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this episode of Bun in the Oven, and I hope you found it helpful. For more support, do head to the show notes below to find links and supplementary reading we feel may be helpful to you. Secondly, this podcast can only help those who know about it. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean so much if you could give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. While podcasts are easy to listen to, they take a lot of effort to create, and your support in sharing Bun in the Oven will help me encourage more guests to join me for future episodes. Thank you so much for watching today and enjoy the rest of your day.